Okay, so back to our identity misbinding attack. Where is my... Okay, so we saw that Eve can take that protocol and play woman in the middle, change the name of Alice instead, put her name instead of Alice, get the Bob's message across without any change. Then when the signature of Alice comes, instead she signs the same value GYGX. She doesn't know Y or X, but she caused this consistency issue in which Alice thinks that she's talking, she exchanged the key K with Bob, and Bob thinks that he exchanged the key with Alice. So let's an example of something that can go wrong. So Alice has this idea, I share the key K with Bob, Bob shared key K with Eve. Now if B is a bank and Alice and Eve are customers, if Alice sends to Bob a message saying deposit $1,000 in my account, and it comes encrypted and authenticated with K, B, the bank, has deposits the money to the owner of the key K, because only the owner of the key K can be giving this order, but in the view of the bank, this goes to Eve's account. So, you know, this is actually the original example from the paper by Diffie, Van Oorschot, and Wiener, where they show this UKS attack for the first time. You can argue, well, you know, the bank, when there is an order to the bank, there should be an account number and the names and stuff like that. But maybe. But when you build a key exchange protocol, you don't want to base yourself on something that the application will do or will not do. You want to provide the guarantees, basic guarantees at the level of the protocol itself. So interestingly, there is an attack on SSL. I mean, those of you that I don't know, that work with SSL or are aware of that, there is a very famous attack or bug called the renegotiation bug, which actually shows a problem like this. It's not exactly UKS attack in this sense, but it's a cousin. It's very similar, and the point there is that there were different exploitations of the attack. One of it was Alice sending to Bob a command to post some page on my website, and my website is whatever is the website of the owner of the key K, which in this case Bob posts it on the website of Eve. So maybe that was something private for Alice, and now it's being posted some other place. I will not get into the description of the renegotiation attack. Maybe you'll see that in one of the coming days, because it's definitely an important example of what can go wrong in a key exchange protocol in very, very practical terms. But essentially, it's something that allowed an attacker to there is the client and the server, Alice and Bob, talking through the attacker, and the attacker being able to prefix the information sent by Alice with some information that the server will understand it was authenticated by Alice, but actually comes from the attacker, and that's how all kind of exploits can be used. As in the case of this attack, the attacker in the renegotiation bug doesn't learn the key. So it's a very good example of very practical stuff. For example, these have been used for injection attacks. It has been used for actually stealing cookies. So even without knowing the key, there are all kinds of things that the actual attacks here could exploit. You know, I used to have this example as another example, and it's very timely. This is from 2012. This was a story that the Iranian got an American drone that was they got in undamaged, and it was a big deal because usually you don't want these pieces of high technology to fall in the hands of the enemy. So there was a big story about that, and I don't know if you followed the news from this country in the last day. The Israelis actually got an Iranian drone, but so that's just coincidence. But anyway, I will describe the thing. Basically, it was about something giving a command to destroy, a command to the drone to destroy itself, and instead sending it to an F-16 that it destroyed. So it has some very common things with what happened yesterday, but just coincidentally. So as I said, this was discovered by these guys. And I call it the differential cryptanalysis of key exchange protocols. I call it differential cryptanalysis. You know, when Shamir and Biham came with differential cryptanalysis, you could see one cipher after the other being broken by this new attack. And this is something, that's if someone gives me a protocol to look at it and decide if it's secure or not, the first thing I will try is whether it falls to an attack like this, and that happens many times. Okay, as I said before, the identity misbinding attack is something I try to push. People still call it unknown key share. In last years, I used it also. I gave up, even though, of course, identity misbinding is what actually is happening. Okay, now, in case, for those of you that still don't understand what an identity misbinding attack is, let me show you something that will, let's see how this works. Now you're going to understand how it works. Not like that. Again. I don't know if you can. Okay. It already looks interesting, right? Okay, one more time. The music is sexy music. Have to look to the end, okay? It's not the end, okay? Okay, now you will not forget what. Actually, after seeing this, I actually understood more of what an unknown key share may mean. Okay. Actually, I have an interesting story about this I once gave a talk somewhere, and I used the USB. And when I put the USB, it started playing this video. So and it has nothing to do. It was not about anything like this. So it's just the USB did that. So I stopped it. But I stopped it after the beginning, in which you already see that something is going on there. And said, oh, you know, people would say, who knows what is that this guy is playing there? So I had to go and say, you know, I'm going to show you this, so you see that it's not so bad. It really didn't look good. Anyway. Okay, so how do we solve that issue? Well, we have this simple solution, which is we include under the signature the identity of the peer. I mean, if Bob thinks that he's talking to Alice, then he will include the identity of Alice under the signature. Same thing Bob will do. And now this actually thwarts the identity misbinding attack because, you know, in this attack, Eve sent the same G to the X, but now Bob that saw that it comes from Eve, it includes the name of Eve under the signature, and when Eve wants to send this to Alice, it either has to, if it sends whatever she got from Bob, it includes her identity, so Alice will say, haha, this is not for me, this is for someone else, for Eve, whatever, so she will not accept the thing. And the other option for Eve is to take the signature and sign it with A here and G to the X here, but that would mean being able to sign instead of Bob, and that she cannot do. So this actually solves the attack by putting the name of Eve. And as I said, A says, okay, notices that Bob is talking to someone else, and Eve cannot produce the signature without breaking actually and finding the signature key of Bob. Now, this is called, by the way, ISO protocol. This is a subset of a protocol standardized by ISO. Actually, the protocol is more complicated, but this is the basics. And the question now is, okay, so I show you a couple of attacks on the previous versions of the protocol, and this actually solves the attack, the identity misbinding attack, the way I showed it. But is it secure? Okay, I mean, maybe what is the next attack? So in order to answer that question, we actually need to develop a security model. And actually, there is a proof of this protocol in one of the models of key exchange that I will talk about. The protocol is more complicated, but I mean, we can show that all the things that they added around are unnecessary for the security of the protocol. And this is one of the things that I advertise all the time, which is when you design protocols with proof in mind, that actually helps simplifying the protocols, because then you can actually identify what are the crucial, real needed pieces in the design. And I'll show more examples of these in these coming hours. But anyway, so I'm saying that it's secure. Of course, secure is in terms of a security model and security definition. So let's talk a little bit about this formal work. Again, I'm going to talk about these things in very, very general lines, very high level. The details will come in the coming days. So, you know, there are maybe two main methodologies for analyzing crypto protocols, in particular key exchange. One is complexity-based, using the tools of complexity theory, reductions, assumptions, hard problems, et cetera, et cetera. The other one is more logic-based. This has a long tradition. This is an approach in which you take cryptographic primitives and you look at them as some idealized objects. Now, over the years, these two methodologies actually have seen some convergence. And now, today, there are very, very strong tools that can actually do automated analysis of cryptographic protocols. Automated in the sense, in some state machine that looks for good or bad ending states. But particularly lately in the design of TLS 1.3 that happened in the last 3 years, we've seen really, really amazing use and results of these automated tools that not only can analyze protocols on their very basic crypto skeleton, but they can analyze also a specification of the protocol and even in some cases implementations of the protocol. So that is very interesting stuff. I don't know if how much of this you are going to see. Kartik, the talk on Wednesday, he's one of the people behind this kind of work. So hopefully he will talk a little bit about that too. So when we go to a definition, right? I had this slide before about what we want from a definition. So, intuitive, but, in this case, the notion of session, attacker capabilities, secrecy, these are things that we all understand we want. We want to be able to take bad protocols, for example, the bad age of one of these protocols that we haven't seen that they are formally insecure, but obviously any good definition will have to decide that this was a bad protocol. Something like the ISO protocol, at least so far we didn't see problems, so maybe it seems like something very simple, and it would be nice if actually a good security definition can accept them as secure. And we want to be able also to have this element of usability in the sense of making it not too complicated to prove security of protocols, and very importantly, not only analyze these protocols just as standalone elements that don't exist anywhere except in a world of themselves, but actually be able to analyze the things as part of a bigger system in composition with other elements, other protocols. I will not go through this thing, but you can look at this slide. I like this. This is taken from the paper of Alan Turing in his paper on computable numbers, basically the paper about the basics of computability, what is computable and not computable. And he has some discussion in the paper. He has to define computable numbers, but how do you define this? There is intuition. So, he has some very interesting things to say. And then he says, the arguments which I shall use are of 3 kinds: a direct appeal to intuition, a proof of equivalence of 2 definitions, and giving examples of large classes of numbers which are computable. So I feel a little bit like doing the thing, going over the intuition. I'll tell you about some definitions that have equivalence. And of course, we have all these examples of protocols that helps us seeing if the definition makes sense or not. We have to remember that proofs are never stronger than the model on which they rely. Okay, so the model is very important. Let me skip some of the history here. There is a Bellaire-Rogoway model from '93 that began with only symmetric key authentication, and over the years was developed there was this work with Bellare and Canetti in 98 that went from indistinguishability-based assumption to a simulation-based assumption. And then there is this model called SK security, but actually known as the Canetti-Krawczyk model, that basically what we try to do there is to actually show equivalence between an indistinguishability-based definition to a simulation-based or composability-based definition, in part to follow this point of Turing of saying that one of the ways of gaining confidence on a definition is that if you have two definitions that look different, not obviously equivalent, and if you can show that they are equivalent, then it gives you some confidence that you are attacking the problem or the definition from different angles. These days, these models evolved, and there is now not much difference between these models. There are still some technical operational differences, and you can choose to work with one or the other. Now, this is also actually one of the reasons in this paper we wanted to do composition and simulation is because we wanted to show, we wanted a model that will be able to claim more than just key exchange. We wanted to compose with applications, and the main applications for key exchange is secure channels. So that's something that this theory actually allows you to do. Again, today you can do the same these days with Bellare Rogeway, and I believe that Mark tomorrow will go into this. By the way, there is a duplicate slide here for those that you have these handouts. So Mark will go into these things in more detail. Let me just go fast over the basic elements of these definitions. You have a two-party protocol in a multi-party setting. Different executions can run concurrently between the same and different parties. Each execution is called a session. Okay, so a session is an internal object, internal to a party. So a session in this case is not something, it's not the interaction itself, it's the state that exists at the party in which it has all the elements of what is going on, who this party thinks he is interested to talk to, and what are the messages that were exchanged till now, etc. So it's a local object. In this model, we give names to sessions. So each party will give each one of their own sessions a name. We name them by the owner of the session, the party that is running the session, and some identity, session identity that, or identifier that the party gives. We assume that all sessions are giving unique names. So, the party can use a counter or can use a nonce, a random numbers, or at least with high probability two sessions at the same party never repeat. And when we want to talk about an execution between two parties, we are going to use the session identifier that Alice gives to her session, and the session identifier that Bob gives to the session. The concatenation of the things will actually have will name the sessions or the protocol execution between these parties. And then there is this notion of matching sessions, which is very, very important in these definitions, which means, if I am running a session with Bob and Bob is running a session with me, we want to be able to match the two sessions that we are talking together. Since sessions can be interleaved by the attacker, okay, then I may start many different sessions with Bob, and Bob will be answering to these different sessions. I need to be able to match each response which the actual initial session. These are things that are done by the real-world protocols by using session identifiers of different forms. It can be nonces, it can be explicit session identifiers, but they are needed to do this matching. So what is the output of a session? An output of a session, when a session completes, I mean, a session can complete in two ways. It can be invalid, or if it ends normally, it will have a session ID name, a peer ID, who I think I'm talking to, and the value of the session key. So you have these different elements, and now you want to use these different elements to actually build the definition of security. Okay, so so you have the syntax of sessions at the level of the players. Now we want to talk about the attacker's capabilities. Okay, so the adversary model, and later, we will call this an authenticated links model, but forget for it for the moment. I will say why we use this name. The adversary model, as I said before, again, you can formalize the things, but basically it's a man in the middle, monitoring, controlling, and modifying traffic at will. Okay, it schedules the key exchange sessions. As I said, if there are many sessions going together, it can interleave them and map them in any way it wants. Eve was working, she was intercepting some of the messages, changing them, sending them. It can send in different orders. All of this is allowed for the attacker. The attacker can corrupt parties. If it finds the long-term secrets, the private signing keys or stuff like that, we will consider the party as fully corrupted. Once the attacker has the private keys, the long-term private keys, we consider the attacker to be, that party to be completely controlled by the attacker. That, by the way, is the basic model. There are refinements of this model saying, for example, even if the attacker found the private key of a party, there's still some security we can assume. For example, if the attacker found the key but is not controlling physically the party, then that party is using the key, the private key, to establish sessions, not directly controlled by the attacker, and in that case, you still want these sessions to be secure. Some protocols will give you that property, some other protocols will not. So total corruption, for now, we call things in which the attacker learns the long-term secret keys, and in this case, we assume that it learns the states of the sessions that exist and the session keys that were not erased. However, we can also, we assume also some forms of partial corruption, in the sense that not the long-term keys are not found, but there are session-specific information that is found, such as session state query. So, the attacker goes into the memory of the victim, learns what's there. For example, it learns the exponent x of g to the x in a session that is going on. And the first attack I showed is the one in which the first message of Alice is x, g to the x, signature of g to the x. And the reason I said this is bad is because if the attacker learns one time one x like that, then it can impersonate Alice forever. Actually, that assumes that the attacker can actually go and read the internals of a session of a party. And that is actually captured by this session state query. This query that the attacker says, okay, I want to see the information in that in the state of that session. And then there is a query that also allows to the attacker that we call session key query, in which the attacker is allowed to learn session keys. So the session is done, is completed. Now the attacker comes and says, I want to see that key. Now, what does this thing capture? First of all, I may be using an encryption key and using it storing it in some less secure memory, and the attacker can learn the key from there. So it will learn the full key. But not only that, actually the attacker learns information about the key from the use of the key. Okay? For example, if the attacker knows that the key is one of two values, and it sees a message encrypted under that key, okay, or authenticated under that key, then the attacker, just by seeing the legitimate use of the key, can learn things about the key. So all of that stuff is actually captured by these session key queries. So, okay, so now we want to have the notion of exposed session. Exposed sessions are those sessions that the attack did things to that session that we have no hope of keeping that session secure, at least in the basic model. And these are sessions that either the party to that session is corrupted, or one of these queries were issued against the session. You know, the attacker learned something about the session state, or the attacker learned the session key for that session. Now, if the attacker learns, you know, Alice has the session with Bob, and the attacker learned, let's say, the session key from that session, well, you don't expect to give any security to that session key. Now, the problem is that Bob has the same session key because it was talking to Alice in that session. So when the session is exposed at Alice, then there is a session that is also exposed at Bob, and that's where we use this notion of matching sessions. Okay? Again, tomorrow I'm sure Mark will go over these notions with you know, much more care. But these are the basic ingredients that we use. You know, sessions at each party, and then some relationship with those sessions that we usually call the matching, that say if session X at Alice was compromised, then we cannot give any security to that session Y at Bob. And this is what we call exposed sessions. Once we have defined all of the things, and again, all of the things can be defined formally. I'm just giving you, you know, the ingredients. Then once we have that, then we can go and define security in the following way. So first of all, you require that completed sessions, I mean sessions that were that they were defined as valid by the owner of the session. You know, Alice said, okay, this session ended well. Everything that I had to verify, signatures, MAC, encryptions, whatever I had to verify went well. So it is a completed session. Now, if there are two sessions that you define as matching, okay, and again, there are different ways of matching, of defining. I just mentioned to you one of the ways is matching by the correspondence of session IDs. Any two matching sessions should output the same key. I mean, this is a correctness property, right? If every, you know, you can think about these sessions as something that the attacker did not bother with them, okay? If the session was not interfered by the attacker, then you want the session keys computed by the two sessions to be the same. On the other hand, for exposed sessions, you don't give security, but for those that are unexposed, meaning the session and the matching session were not actually attacked, were not queried by the attacker, then what you do is you have this experiment. I mean, it's an abstract experiment in which you say, I let the attacker choose among all the unexposed sessions, one of the sessions, and I'm going to test the attacker on that session. Now, how do I test the attacker on that session? I tell the attacker, look, here are two keys. One is completely random, independent of what happened in the protocol, and one is the actual key from the protocol. You have to tell me which one is the true one, which one is the random one. If the attacker is unable to distinguish between these two cases, what it means is that the key that parties exchanged is as good as a random, independent, secret key. Okay, so that's the typical indistinguishability approach to security definitions in crypto. Okay, but what this means, and this is an important thing, is that what these definitions say is that once the key exchange protocol is over and the parties have a session key, you can think about this as if they got a random key from some trusted party. It's like if they met together and exchanged that shared key. So running the key exchange protocol or going into physical security or God giving them a random secret key is essentially the same. Okay, so that's what the idea of indistinguishability gives you, the equivalence between a key that you exchange with a random key provided by God or by physical communication. Okay, actually I wanted to, okay, I wanted to say something, but I'll have to say, so anyway, what I want to say now is that this thing that I said, that finishing the key exchange protocol and having that shared key being equivalent to something that was given by God or by physical exchange, it's an abstraction which is essentially untrue for this type of definitions. Having a key which is indistinguishable from random is not equivalent in general to having it given by a trusted party. And I should have said this now, but I will say that in a couple of slides, and I don't want to have to go back. So let me go over a couple of slides, and then I will explain what I mean by that. Okay, so let's summarize the things that can be informally inferred by the security definitions of the things. So if A and B are honest, and by the way, this is one thing that is significant here, we only provide guarantees of security for parties that act honestly. If you as a party don't act honestly, you depart from the protocol, or you publish your session keys on the web or something like that, we are not going to guarantee you any security. But if two parties, Alice and Bob, act honestly, then here's the type of guarantees that all these definitions give you. If they output the session key with the parties being Alice, Bob, and the key K, I mean, if Alice says, okay, I ended my session with Bob as a peer and K as the session key, and B is honest, then what I know is that no one other than Bob knows anything about the key. Now, not only anything about the key means anything in the sense of indistinguishability. It's equivalent to a random key, meaning that even a single bit or a single predicate about the key is not known. Is the least significant bit 1 or 0? You don't know. Is that, I don't know, a quadratic residue or whatever? No property of the key is known. Again, everything is against computationally bounded attackers. By the way, does the definition guarantee that if Alice outputs the key, then Bob also outputs the key? So the basic definitions that we use don't guarantee that. You can add, it's called key confirmation, is that Alice waits for Bob to send something related to the key so she knows that Bob computed the key. That you can always do, but you cannot never achieve, you can never achieve common knowledge. I mean, Alice can know that Bob output the same key, okay? And Bob can know that Alice output the same key, but Alice, you can never know, that each one knew, this notion of common knowledge. So Alice may know that Bob exchanged the same key, but Bob doesn't know if Alice knows. In other words, if the last message in the protocol is not delivered, then there is a cut in the sense of how much knowledge, how many rounds of knowledge you have. So the bottom line is that key confirmation. By the way, there are some formalism of key exchange in which actually key confirmation is part of the definition. I prefer definitions that don't have that. I prefer definitions that are as general as possible, and then you can put more features or more specific properties on top of that. But again, these is things of, as I said, definitions are correct by definition. So which one you choose depends on what you're trying to do. But anyway, the issue that at the end of the day you want is that either you exchange the same key with an honest peer, or the key that you exchange with anyone which is not honest is completely independent of the keys you exchange with honest parties. Okay, now I want to talk about this thing. All these models, the Belara-Rowey, Canetti, Krawczyk, and all the kind of derivatives, at least used to be, and I mean, they were designed like this. There is no guarantee. If you're talking to a corrupted party, I give you no guarantee of, I mean, you can talk to a corrupted party. You may end the protocol without knowing that you talk to a corrupted party, because the party, from your point of view, behaved okay. And you exchange a key with that party. The model doesn't give you any guarantee about that key. In particular, it can be that the key that you now exchange with that corrupted party is the same as another key that you exchange with another corrupted party. It cannot be the case that the corrupted party will make you exchange a key with that corrupted party, which is the same that one that you did with an honest party, but you can have the same key with two different corrupted parties, or with two runs with the same corrupted party. These definitions don't call a protocol that allows you to do that insecure, okay? And the idea is that, a corrupted party can publish the session key that they exchange with you. It can, there's no reason for you now to think that that key needs to be protected because, you have no control of that key. Now, interestingly, you will hear probably from Krawczyk about an interesting attack against TLS called the triple handshake attack that actually builds on the fact that in TLS, TLS actually allowed the attacker to force two different sessions to have the same session key. So we, under this definition that I was talking about, we would have called that protocol secure, okay? But it happens that actually they could exploit this in a very practical way. So there is an example of where we believe that that definition covers the important stuff that key exchange need to have, and it turns out that it didn't cover it. Now, who is to blame? Us or them? Of course them, right? I mean, we did the right thing. They did the wrong thing. So the problem comes from the fact that in TLS, or in some derivatives of TLS, they decided to use the session key, the value of the session key, as some kind of an identifier of sessions. Okay? Now, we assume sessions that an honest party has to be unique. In our model, the party, Alice is the one that chooses her session identifiers, and she is careful to choose them different, or at least with high probability if these are chosen with random nonces. Okay? But TLS, or applications of TLS, actually use the session key as a session identifier. And now suddenly, Alice finds herself with two different sessions, even though they are with a corrupted party that have the same session ID, and that's something that is being exploited in that attack, which I will not show because Kartik will show that on Wednesday. But this is a very good example of, the definitions are definitions, correct by definition, but not necessarily, covering everything you need in a setting. Okay, so one always has to be careful, and one of the things I always say, a proof based on the definition or a model is never stronger than the model itself. And now, can we have definitions that will resist anything that people can imagine doing outside the model? Of course, you cannot do that. But what we learn over the years is to have definitions and protocols that are as much as abuse resistant as possible. You try to think all the things that people can do with this stuff and try to build defenses against that. This is a never-ending story. People will always find some creative ways of doing something you didn't think about. So, so that is, I intend this just to give you ideas of the process of defining and the things that you have to take into account. And since if you are hungry for details, then Mark will have to deliver. Yeah, I have this great situation in which I can throw everything to, the last person to talk will not be able to say, Hugo said that, he didn't say. Kenny Patterson coming the last day, he comes only for that day, so he doesn't need to know what we said before. That's, I think, the reason he's coming the last day. Right.
But could it be that they are just, you can simplify assuming the model, but from some unexpected attack would start working for the simplified protocol maybe? Could it happen?
Yeah, well, again, when I say the proofs allow you to simplify the protocol and make it as simple as possible for that model, This ISO protocol, the simple thing that Alice puts the key, the identity of Bob inside the signature and stuff like that, the actual ISO protocol has all kind of marks going here and there, and actually you don't need them for the security. So for the provided model, then this simpler, then you can say, okay, this is as simple as I can have it. I will show you in those protocols called implicit authenticated that this simplicity goes really to some extreme. But it is true that actually to do things that are robust in the sense of withstanding as much as possible the things that people can do and build on this stuff, then the simplest of things is not necessarily the most robust. Okay, and I will touch on that. But this is an important point. We need to understand the basic crypto mechanism, okay? that must be there to give you the basic security, but then you can build many things on top of that. But if you don't understand the basic thing, then you cannot build too much on top of that.
Hugo?
Yeah.
Just to clarify, so the triple handshake attack doesn't actually contradict the model, right? Because they
Right.
do assume that they're individual. They're
Yes.
independent sessions.
Yes. So the proof that the protocol, I mean, I'm not claiming that the protocol, the TLS protocol, had the proof. I mean, there are subset of the TLS protocol that have proofs. But anyway, you can assume that the protocol had a complete proof under these models that I'm talking about, and the attack still exists. Okay. So how can it be that you have a proof of security, and then actually there is an attack? The solution to this, I mean, there are two solutions. Either the proof was wrong, or if the proof was correct, then it means that that attack was outside the model. Okay? And again, there is no model that covers all possible attacks. For example, I haven't talked about things like, side channel attacks, or, timing attacks, things like that. So, you define a model and you prove on that model. There is no universal model, but what there is basic models that you can say at least without these properties, then it's hard to believe that something can be built on top of that and still be secure. You don't seem to be convinced.
You're saying the model isn't strong enough? Or
I'm saying that the model is, well, I don't want to say the model is not strong enough. I want to say that that attack is outside the model.
isn't the protocol not meeting the model if it doesn't guarantee a different session ID? If the protocol doesn't meet the definition, not that the attack is outside the model. The protocol cannot be proven by the definition because there's no independent session ID.
No. The protocol is secure in that model. The model says session keys exchange between an honest party and a corrupted party. That session key can have any value. Okay? In the UC model, the definition of the UC model, in the case that one of the parties is a corrupted party, the attacker provides the value of the key. Okay? It's very hard to guarantee that a key is random if you are talking to a corrupted person. Actually, it is possible only under the random oracle model. But for example, in Diffie-Hellman, if the guy chooses their X, to the X in some particular ways, I mean, there are ways of moving this from randomness. So it's very hard to actually capture that. But what I'm trying to say is that you will see things that in a certain setting is considered a valid attack, okay? And your proof or your model didn't capture that, okay? There was now a few months ago an attack on the Wi-Fi systems on WPA that the protocol was proven. And actually, I haven't looked at the proof, but there is no reason not to believe that it was proven. It was completely broken. Okay, it's proven and completely broken. What happened there? Well, there is a question of implementation of the protocol that actually was implemented in a way that departed from the way it was defined in this, originally defined and proven. So there is no magic here, okay? You will never get to cover everything that someone can do. People should have not used a secret session key as an identifier of a session, okay? Bad guys, okay? They should have not done that. Unfortunately, it was done in TLS that we all use, okay? So, But again, we learn a little bit more about being more robust. Even if we can prove that something, some minimal protocol is secure, we may add some safety margins to it, even if it's not in the protocol. Okay, an important thing to do is if you have a definition of a key exchange, is to show that that definition implies secure channels. Well, secure channels is secure communications, is that we communicate and any information I send you, it will come to you, if we are honest, unchanged, or if it changed, you will detect that. I will skip everything that has to do with secure channels because, again, I can say Kenny Patterson, last day, he's giving how many? 6 hours about secure channels. So believe me, you don't need me. I mean, the truth is that this is another very interesting aspect. We thought that secure channel, when I was working with RAN, we were defining secure channel. What is secure channel? You take a message, you encrypt, you authenticate, and you send it. Okay, and now you have to find a model that says that works the way you assume it works. In practice, actually, you take a message, you don't really encrypt, authenticate. You first break it into parts, fragments, IP packets, TLS records, whatever, and then you do something to each piece separately. And now it turns out that even if in your abstraction it was a message encrypted and authenticated, in reality it's different pieces that can be put together in different ways depending on what the attacker does. So this is in reality, in practice, a much more complicated primitive than we imagined ourselves. So Kenny will talk about these elements from the simple case to the real world case and again, attacks and problems that happen with that. But my point of view of all the things is that, okay, you can learn about these particular things, but I think you have, if your work is in specifying, designing this kind of protocol, then it's important that you understand all the details of these attacks. But there is this more general thing, okay, which has to do, all of these elements that touch on cryptographic design in general. And I think that the important thing, at least for a general class or audience, is to get the spirit of the things. Okay. I will show several protocols that are secure. After all this story, again, I'm not going to show formal proof because I didn't define the formal model, but I'll give you enough of the elements to get an idea of the of how you prove the things. One last thing I want to say is this thing that I wanted to have it before. So there is this indistinguishability-based approach to definitions in cryptography, which is the traditional one. We use that for encryption. We use that for pseudo-random functions. Here we use it for key exchange. And there is the other approach, which is the simulation-based approach, or what came to be called in general the universal composability approach, which is simulation-based. But the great advantage of this approach is that you can reason about protocols. You can cover security not only of protocols that are run in isolation from the rest of applications and uses of the protocol, but you can actually analyze the protocol and give assurances about how secure it will be when you compose it with other elements. So the issue of taking a key exchange protocol and composing it with authentication and encryption to get secure communications, that's one example of composition. And the models that give you the assurance that you can analyze the protocol in isolation, but then have a theorem saying, okay, but that analysis immediately applies to also to composing this protocol with other with other applications, that type of model is a strong model. And so one of the advantages of this work I did with Ran Canetti is that we can prove that protocols in the particular model that we have, this Canetti-Krawczyk model, today this has been extended also to Bellarer-Rogaway. So this indistinguishable, usually there is a big gap between indistinguishability-based definitions and UC or composition-based definitions. In the case of key exchange, it happens that actually you can show equivalence. And this is to, to talk to the point of Turing saying that one of the ways of getting assurance or confidence on a definition is having more than one definition that look very different. I'm not showing how the composition one looks. Again, Mark, I'm throwing everything to Mark. You are having a list, right? You're writing down a list of things that you have to cover, right? Very good, very good. This is nice. This is nice because, I mean, there are many times working with an indistinguishability definition is easier or even a little bit more intuitive than working with the simulation-based ones. And here it's nice that you can do one and get the other for free. There are some caveats to the equivalence that I will not get into them, but essentially these things are equivalent, again, up to some care that you have to have there. And what we will do now when we come back is I will show you how to actually design and prove protocols using these composition ideas. Okay, something we call authenticators, but that after the break.